Happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody. James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office breakdown. And the topic today, obviously, is Star Wars, although we'll be talking about Obsession as well. But let's start with The Mandalorian and Grogu, which across the traditional 3-day weekend grossed $82 million. But across the 4-day holiday frame, it is estimated to collect $102 million. And that number might be adjusted a little bit up or down by this time tomorrow. But what's interesting about that $102 million total is that it is precisely $1 million shy of the $103 million that Solo: A Star Wars Story generated over Memorial Day weekend back in 2018, unadjusted for inflation. And now the spin begins because fans of Disney Star Wars are going to try and spike the football, while those who despise Disney Star Wars will rightly point out this is the lowest opening weekend of any Star Wars movie since Disney took over the franchise. Rogue One opened to 155, The Rise of Skywalker opened to 177, The Last Jedi opened to 220, and The Force Awakens opened to 247. And the big question that we won't know the answer to for several weeks is whether or not The Mandalorian and Grogu will have a better worldwide gross than Solo: A Star Wars Story. The first Star Wars movie ever to lose money theatrically, but that movie had a much bigger budget than The Mandalorian and Grogu, because famously Phil Lord and Chris Miller, about halfway through the production, got fired due to creative differences, and Ron Howard was brought in to kind of change the creative direction of the movie and shift the tone, but the budget ballooned. But now that Project Hail Mary has become this worldwide smash and one of the most popular movies of 2026, in hindsight, perhaps Phil Lord and Chris Miller were on the right track with Solo: A Star Wars Story, and they should have just been left alone, but that is another debate for another day. But my prediction for The Mandalorian and Grogu is that once the dust is settled and we know the final box office tally, I do think it'll surpass Solo: A Star Wars Story, because back in 2018, we were getting Star Wars movies every single year, and if a movie didn't deliver, well, it's easier to ignore one movie and just wait for whatever was coming next. And because The Mandalorian and Grogu is geared and marketed towards toddlers, or at least those with a toddler's tastes and preferences, it basically has no competition on that front for the next couple weeks until Toy Story 5. However, the Masters of the Universe is right around the corner. If that movie turns out to be pretty good, it very well might devour The Mandalorian and Grogu, because like Star Wars, the Masters of the Universe has an interesting blend of fantasy and sci-fi, and I really have no idea what to expect from that movie. But if it delivers at all, I think it's going to completely, utterly destroy The Mandalorian and Grogu then and there. But we'll have to wait a few weeks before having that conversation.
I have the power!
When it comes to a movie's performance over a 4-day holiday weekend, like Memorial Day weekend, which kicks off the summer, sometimes it's tough to compare the performance to other movies that are released over a more conventional 3-day weekend. So I thought it might be useful to compare The Mandalorian and Grogu with some other movies that came out over Memorial Day weekend, just to give us an additional perspective versus some movies that don't necessarily have Star Wars in the title. And luckily, Box Office Mojo has us covered with a list of the top 272 movies ever to open over Memorial Day weekend. And if you're curious, number 272 is the 2018 re-release of a movie called Two Men Went to War, and it grossed $250. So luckily, The Mandalorian and Grogu can say that it did better than that movie. But let's look at the top 10, because that's a lot more. That includes a lot more recent movies, and I think that'll be the more useful comparison. So the number one Memorial Day weekend opening ever was just last year with Lilo and Stitch, which opened to $182 million. That's fantastic. Number 2, Top Gun Maverick, which opened to $160. Number 3, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, opened to $139. Number 4, this is dreadful, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a movie which I found to be completely pathetic and lame, only to be surpassed a few years later by Dial of Destiny. But number 5, this is interesting, X-Men: The Last Stand. So keep in mind, that movie came out in 2006. There's been quite a lot of inflation since then, but X-Men: The Last Stand opened to $122. Back in 2006, The Little Mermaid, a movie which famously kind of underperformed overall, that's number 6 with $118 million across Memorial Day weekend. Number 7, Fast and the Furious 6 with $117 million. Number 8 is Aladdin, which opened to $116, and that came out the year of 2019, where I think Disney had 7 movies that crossed $1 billion. And 2019 will go down in history as the all-time great year for Disney when it comes to box office. But number 9, we're back in X-Men terrain, X-Men: Days of Future Past, which opened to $110 million. I fucking love Days of Future Past. I think I saw it 3 times in the theater. Strong contender for my favorite X-Men movie, but maybe the first Deadpool, or maybe Logan. Those are probably my 2 favorite X-Men movies. But Days of Future Past was pretty goddamn good. But I find it fascinating that we have 2 X-Men movies in the top 10 for Memorial Day weekend. Number 10, we have the only comedy in the mix, The Hangover Part 2, which opened to $103 million.
Where the hell are you?
We're in Bangkok. Holla! City of Squala! Hola!
we're going to stop my compare and contrast with number 11, Solo, a Star Wars story, which opened to $103 million on May 25th, 2018. So once this list gets updated, The Mandalorian and Grogu will come in at number 12, replacing The Lost World Jurassic Park, which opened back in 1997. So if you adjust for inflation, obviously, The Lost World Jurassic Park would gross considerably higher. But I'm doing a quick scan. X-Men Apocalypse is 15 with $79 million. And X-Men Apocalypse wasn't even all that great a movie, but it's interesting that the X-Men historically have enjoyed so much success across this weekend. But the question now is, how much staying power does The Mandalorian and Grogu need to have not to be considered an embarrassment for the franchise and for Disney? Because if you take Disney at their word that the movie only has a budget of $165 million, and spoiler alert, I don't believe them, but if you take them at their word that they only spent $165 million on it, conventional movie math, you take the budget, you multiply it by 2.5, and that takes into account the revenue split with theaters as well as marketing. However, keep in mind that Disney spent a shitload of money marketing this movie, including that abysmal trailer that they included during the Super Bowl. So when a studio spends a ton of money on marketing, it's better to take the budget and multiply it by 3, and then more or less you'll have the kind of the break-even point where it's no longer considered a humiliating defeat. So if you take them at their word, $165 million, and I've got a calculator set up on my computer, that times 3. I should have been able to do this in my head, but it's a slow morning for me. That would be $495 million. So let's call it at $500 million. If The Mandalorian and Grogu can cross $500 million worldwide over the next couple of weeks, I think Disney at that point can at least say, well, we didn't hit a home run, but we at least got on base, and we've got Starfighter coming out next year. The future is bright for the Star Wars franchise. I would disagree, because at this point, if you take into account all the hours that are included in all the Star Wars shows, and then you include all the hours of all the Star Wars movies, the number of good Star Wars hours versus bad Star Wars hours, the good hours are vastly outnumbered by the bad hours. Disney has horribly mismanaged this franchise, and in hindsight, creating all these shows for Disney Plus was a horrible mistake for both Star Wars as well as Marvel. And keep in mind, at one time, Star Wars was the most popular original concept ever invented for the movies, not based on a book or a game or a comic or a play. If you look at the history of original screenplays, it's hard to find box office juggernauts where it was an original screenplay written specifically for the movies, and Star Wars is that movie. If you look at a list of the all-time top 10 highest performing movies adjusted for inflation, Gone with the Wind's number 1, but that was based on a popular bestseller. Star Wars is number 2. It is the most popular original movie ever created.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times. Before the Empire.
And the fact that we're wondering now in 2026 whether or not a new Star Wars movie will even manage to break even, well, that tells you the full tale of Disney's horrible mismanagement of this once great legendary franchise. But let's talk about a positive news story, because Obsession continues to wildly outperform, I think, even the most optimistic projections going into the release of this movie, because we have a rare situation where in its second weekend, the box office went up. That's like as rare as like Halley's Comet coming by, which I think is like once every 85 years or so. But hang on, let me go back to my article to get the exact number. So last weekend, Obsession opened to $16 million, which was considered fantastic because the movie was made for $1 million, then it sold for $14 million. But in its second weekend, this R-rated indie horror movie earned $22 million, and it's estimated that by the time the holiday weekend is over, it will have earned $28.2 million, which is completely fucking insane. That's a 30% increase over its opening weekend. If it had only dropped 30%, it still would have been considered wildly successful. This just shows you what happens when you have positive word of mouth. And if you really want to put it in perspective, The Mandalorian and Grogu was made in theory for $165 million, whereas Obsession was made for $1 million. So you could have made 165 independent movies on the scale of Obsession for the budget of Mandalorian and Grogu. And obviously not all those movies would have been as popular as Obsession. But if Disney ever were to make that kind of investment, imagine how many cool new filmmakers would be discovered, how many legendary careers might potentially be launched by supporting some low-budget directors. But for me, this is an obvious frontrunner for the coolest success story so far in 2026, because Curry Barker, he made his first feature for YouTube, Milk and Cereal, and it went viral. People loved it. It was cool. But once again, it was a low-budget movie made for YouTube. So a lot of people are calling Obsession his feature film debut. For me, I don't consider it his debut because back in the 90s, when a lot of movies would go straight to video, if a filmmaker went straight to video and then had a subsequent feature, nobody would say that's his feature film debut because they'd already made a straight to video movie. And I feel like in 2026, if you make a movie for YouTube, that is your feature film debut. It's become a viable platform with which to launch your career. However, for his sophomore effort, there's no sophomore slump. His sophomore slump is a movie that has now grossed $74 million worldwide. And I got to keep saying it. He made the movie for $1 million. And even though it was acquired for $14 million, it would only need to gross $35 million to be considered a profitable movie. It's already at $74 million worldwide. This is fucking insane. And so, Curry Barker, congratulations to you and everybody involved with the film. Obviously, people love the movie. It's doing incredibly well. But I don't know what the term would be for a third effort, but the pressure is going to be on because anytime you have this kind of earth-shattering success on a small scale, who knows what kind of offers are going to come his way. I'm sure every trashy horror franchise out there that's got like 15 entries, they're all going to be trying to recruit him to direct the next Final Destination or the next Scream or the next Mummy or whatever the case might be. My hope is that Curry Barker will remain within the horror genre, but that he'll continue to write original stories. Because I'm sure Blumhouse is going to say, oh, we've got some terrible franchise that we're trying to resurrect. Would you consider coming on board and directing the latest installment? My advice to Curry Barker would be go to Neon. Well, obviously Neon's been very friendly to filmmakers like Osgood Perkins and Damian McCarthy, and I would say, look, I want to make a movie for $10 million this time, but I want to write an original story. Let's get busy. But whatever he does next, people are obviously going to be paying very close attention because Obsession's earned him a lot of new fans, but the industry is going to take note of the following stat. If you look at the top 10 over on Deadline, number 1, obviously, Mandalorian and Grogu. Number 3, Michael. But both of those movies have enormous budgets. Sandwiched in between is Obsession, a movie that is basically operating at like 1/200th the scale of those other two movies, and it's trading body blows and competing very successfully. That is absolutely fucking remarkable. So as somebody who's very nostalgic about the indie film craze of the 1990s, I love seeing a filmmaker like Curry Barker come out of the blue and show all the big dogs out there, you know what, with a little creativity and a little originality, you can be competitive at a very small scale. And so yeah, bravo to everybody involved. I'm blown away. But for the rest of the movies in the top 10, let's head over to Variety, where Rebecca Rubin has an article titled Box Office, Mandalorian and Grogu lifts off with $102 million over Memorial Day holiday. Obsession scores $28 million in huge second weekend. For the first time in nearly 7 years, Star Wars fans finally had a reason to go to the movies, and plenty of them showed up for The Mandalorian and Grogu, which collected $82 million in its opening weekend and an estimated $102 million through Monday. Those ticket sales were aligned with expectations. The box office analysts are mixed on the results. On one hand, it's significant for any film to debut above $100 million in post-pandemic times. On the other, Star Wars is one of Hollywood's preeminent film properties, so there's an expectation of a certain level of box office. And this start is the worst for Star Wars since Disney bought the franchise in 2012. Prior to this weekend, that unfortunate distinction belonged to 2018 spin-off Solo: A Star Wars Story, which opened to $84 million over the weekend and $103 million through the Memorial Day holiday, not adjusted for inflation. Solo, however, was plagued by other issues, including lackluster reviews and tepid word of mouth, none of which helped in terms of box office longevity. It became the first Star Wars movie ever to lose money in its theatrical run, tapping out with $392 million globally against a massive budget of nearly $300 million. The Mandalorian and Grogu carries a leaner $165 million price tag and perhaps more importantly has the benefit of positive audience scores. A truer test of commercial viability will be the film's second weekend in theaters. That'll indicate whether The Mandalorian and Grogu is just appealing to fans of the franchise or if the movie can become a breakout among family crowds. Opening weekend ticket buyers were 63% male while 75% were above the age of 25. Jon Favreau directed the film, which earned an A- grade on CinemaScore exit polls. For comparison, 2019 Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker earned a B+ grade. The story takes place after the third season of the Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian, and revolves around Pedro Pascal's Din Djarin and his adorable green sidekick as they navigate a galaxy that's recovering from the fall of the evil empire. And let me just pause to push back on her characterization because I think this little fucker is scum of the earth, and the longer they continue to lean into Grogu versus other characters or other forms of entertainment, the more they'll kind of they'll restrict the audience of Star Wars to very, very young children. And I feel like the sweet spot for Star Wars is like teenage boys to boys like in their early 20s. That's the crowd that you want that'll go like 8, 9, 10 times, that'll buy the action figures, play the video games, make YouTube videos, that whole deal. That's the crowd Disney should be pursuing, not the very young or the very young at heart. But back to the article. At the international box office, The Mandalorian and Grogu earned $64 million for a global start of $145 million over the 3 days and $165 million over the 4-day frame. All right, let's pause for a second to digest that number, because going into the weekend, I predicted that The Mandalorian and Grogu would gross 90 million domestic, but I thought it might do 100 internationally. And I obviously underestimated the domestic appeal, but I way overestimated the international appeal. This movie might get into serious trouble in the coming weeks if they can't find a way to open up a few more markets on the international level, because as we saw with Superman last year, Superman actually did really, really well in the domestic market. It did horribly internationally. That's what kept those numbers down. But if The Mandalorian and Grogu continues to kind of suck wind on a global scale, we very well might see it come in under Solo: A Star Wars Story. I guess I need to make a firm international prediction. I still think the movie's going to come in like right at 500 internationally. Not because I like the movie, but I just feel like the Star Wars brand is so strong, and the demand for kid-friendly entertainment is so strong. But I very well might be overestimating the enduring appeal of Star Wars. Perhaps the damage runs much deeper than even I'm willing to acknowledge. But back to the article. For all of its originality and fame, Star Wars has never been especially strong overseas, notes David A. Gross, who publishes the box office newsletter Franchise Re. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the first Star Wars movie since 2019's The Rise of Skywalker, which earned $1 billion globally while concluding the 9-chapter Skywalker saga. As Lucasfilm failed for years to launch a new film, the company turned its attention to the small screen with Disney Plus shows in the Mandoverse like The Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka, as well as Andor and Skeleton Crew. And I'm noticing two shows that are conspicuously absent from our analysis because they're the two worst shows that Disney's ever produced within the Star Wars universe, and that would be The Acolyte and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Those shows fucking sucked balls. But back to our article. There won't be as long a wait to return to a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars Starfighter, an original adventure directed by Sean Levy and starring Ryan Gosling, debuts over Memorial Day weekend in 2027, and studio insiders believe the tentpole could serve as a fresh start for the franchise. For Star Wars not to be hurt in any obvious way by its long detour into streaming is good news for the franchise, Gross adds. And let me pause to point out the obvious. David A. Gross, what are you talking about? How can you claim that Star Wars has not been hurt in any obvious way when the first movie in 7 years had the lowest opening weekend of any Star Wars movie in the Disney Star Wars era? I would say there's been irreparable harm done to the Star Wars brand over the last 10 years because there's been a glut of product, and most of it has been subpar, if not outright fucking awful. But back to the article. Although this wasn't a Memorial Day weekend for the record books, last year's holiday was massive with Lilo and Stitch and Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. The nation's movie theaters were bustling with a huge assist from holdover titles like Obsession and Michael. This 4-day weekend delivered $221 million across all films, which isn't too far off from pre-pandemic years, including 2019, $321 million, led by the Aladdin remake, 2018, $225 million, anchored by Solo, and 2017, $182 million, weighed down by Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Post-COVID totals over Memorial Day weekend have been mixed, as 2022 reached $224 million, as Top Gun: Maverick led the way. 2023 brought in $204 million, buoyed by the Little Mermaid remake, and 2024 fell to $132 million as Furiosa misfired. Elsewhere at the box office, the Focus Features horror hit Obsession enjoyed another stellar turnout. After its huge $16 million debut, the R-rated movie has earned $22 million in its second weekend and an estimated $28.2 million through the Monday holiday. Those ticket sales represent a remarkable 30% increase over its opening weekend, a virtually unprecedented uptick for a film that's already in wide release. So far, Obsession has generated $58.5 million in North America and $74 million worldwide. YouTube breakout and first-time director Curry Barker directed the well-reviewed and positively received Obsession, which follows a hopeless romantic who makes a twisted Faustian bargain to win his crush's heart. Two newcomers, Paramount's gruesome thriller Passenger and Neon's crime comedy I Love Boosters, failed to crack the top 5. Passenger opened at number 6 with $8.7 million over the weekend and an estimated $10.5 million through Monday. The R-rated film added $4.8 million overseas for a global start of $13.5 million. Passenger, which follows a young couple who is relentlessly stalked by a demonic entity, has mixed reviews, 42% on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a B- cinema score grade. It cost just $15 million to produce. Yeah, I think this is a clear case where one horror movie is absolutely dismembering yet another horror movie. There's only room for one horror movie sensation at one time, and Obsession has completely, totally eaten the lunch of Passenger. But as far as I Love Boosters is concerned, back to the article, I Love Boosters debuted in 8th place with $3.8 million over the weekend and an estimated $4.7 million through Monday. Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You, directed the film about professional shoplifters who target a cutthroat fashion mogul. Critics Critics dug Boosters, which holds a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, while audiences were mixed, giving a B grade on CinemaScore. It carries a $20 million production budget. And along those lines, I did see the trailer for I Love Boosters, and I quickly realized there might not be a movie in 2026 that would appeal to me less than I Love Boosters, because it takes two topics that don't interest me, fashion and shoplifting, and combines them together into what they're describing as fashion-forward philanthropy. I mean, what a load of bullshit. In any case, I hope the people who made it had a good time making it, and I hope the people who do like it quite a bit, but I will not be seeing it. I will not be reviewing it, and it is no surprise to me whatsoever that it opened in 8th place, because I imagine a lot of people felt precisely the way that I did. But back to the article. 3rd place went to Michael, which has demonstrated exceptional staying power since April. Lionsgate's Michael Jackson biopic brought in $20 million over the weekend and an estimated $25.7 million through Monday. A huge tally for a film in its 5th weekend of release. So far, Michael has earned $319 million in North America and a staggering $788 million globally. It should soon outpace 2018's Bohemian Rhapsody, $911 million, as the highest grossing musical biopic of all time. Disney's The Devil Wears Prada 2 dropped to 4th place with $12.6 million over the weekend and a projected $16.5 million through Monday. After 4 weekends on the big screen, the nostalgic sequel has generated a huge $197 million domestically and $604 million globally. The Sheep Detectives remained in the number 5 spot with $8.9 million over the weekend, a decline of just 6% from the prior frame, and a projected $12.3 million through Monday. The crowd-pleasing mystery starring Hugh Jackman alongside some talking sheep has grossed $46.9 million in North America. Amazon MGM spent a hefty $75 million to produce the film and has to split ticket sales with theater owners. Memorial Day is the official launch to summer at the movies, and Hollywood is encouraged by the momentum heading into the season. That's important because the 4-month period is typically the most profitable stretch, accounting for $4 billion, or around 40% of the annual box office. The broad lineup includes something for every demographic segment, and audiences are enjoying themselves. Gross says business is healthy heading into the heart of summer. In any event, that's all the news that's fit to print, but the big question heading into this week is, what's going to happen when Obsession and Backrooms collide? Because there are only so many horror fans to go around. Obsession is just cleaning up. And will Obsession continue to just steamroll over all the other horror movies out there, or will Backrooms dethrone it? Because the hype and the anticipation for Backrooms is off the charts. I'm unfamiliar with the source material, but apparently it has legions of fans, and A24 is looking to capitalize on that in a big way. Sadly, I've got family obligations from Thursday through Sunday, meaning that not only will I not get to see Backrooms on Thursday, I will not get to do a box office breakdown on Sunday. But between now and when I skip town, when I'm desperately trying to finish, just to have a big video out there between now and then, I've been chipping away for months on a top 10 Greek mythology video. And I started it back like in the early winter when I had a lot more time on my hands. But what I did not appreciate before I got started with my research is just how many Greek mythology movies were made in the 50s and 60s over in Italy, because at that time, religious epics and historical epics got very popular, especially Hercules movies made in Italy. I think there were like 19 Hercules movies made at the time. And so Italy decided just to cash in on the craze and started cranking out movies where basically any movie with like people wearing sandals or togas, Italy just made a ton of them before they finally shifted into making a lot of Westerns in the 1960s. But I'm going to do my best to throw out the widest net possible for a comprehensive overview of all the best and the worst Greek mythology movies made from 1924 up through the present day. And it's been a slow battle, because for every good movie I discover, there are like 5 or 6 terrible movies that I have to kind of battle my way through to land on the good ones. But I think I'm finally ready to speak my piece on my top 10 favorite Greek mythology movies ahead of the release of The Odyssey in July. But for everybody who is debating the pros and cons of The Odyssey, I'll just say it would not be unusual at all for The Odyssey to be an interesting blend of terrible ingredients and great ingredients, because there are almost no Greek mythology movies that have ever been made that are good from start to finish. Even the best has some ingredients you're like, oh, like why'd you change that, or why'd you do that? So I think we're going to have a lot of fun discussing Greek mythology movies between now and July. And I've loved Greek mythology since I was a little kid, so it has been a pleasure and a privilege watching all these weird movies. But it's time to rip off the Band-Aid and make that goddamn video. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, becoming a member. You know the drill. Hope everybody has a great week. Hope everybody enjoys Backrooms, and I look forward to ranting and raving about Greek mythology with y'all in the not so distant future. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.